What up? What up? What up? What up? What up? Hope you're having a good night, guys. It's Tyler with Hook Sets Are Free. Welcome back to another episode. Hope you're having a good one. It is Saturday night, and I'm just hopping on to do a little live stream. We're going to talk about post-spawn baits tonight. So I'm just going to give people a couple minutes to hop in here. Once again, I did not warn anybody that I would be hopping on. Dr. Steve Rob, what's up, dude? Hope you're having a good night. How are you doing, man? Hope everybody is well. Saturday night, I spent the day today with my girls here at the house. Did some yard work, took it easy, did not do any fishing since we talked last night, but wanted to switch up the topic of tonight's conversation. Last night we talked about night fishing. Tonight we're going to talk about post-spawn baits, and I'm going to run through a list of 10 different baits. So should be a fun one. Love to get your guys' thoughts and opinions and favorites when it comes to each one of these baits and categories and rigs as we get into it. So, Justin, what's up, dude? Won't be able to stay long, no problem. Thanks for tuning in, even though you're at work. Ron Hawley in the house. What's up, dude? Hope you're having a good night. So, again, I'm going to give people just a couple of minutes to hop in here. I feel bad that a lot of the regular people were not on last night and very well might not be on tonight simply because of miscommunication on my end. I do need to let you guys know that moving forward for the majority of the rest of the summer, I'm going to be streaming on weekends. My wife is going to be working on weekends. I might be able to work in kind of a regular schedule of once a week during the week, but in general, moving forward, I'm going to be streaming on Friday and Saturday nights when I'm doing live streams. Guggen Slayer, what's up, bro? I forget what your actual name is, Guggen Slayer. Remind me one more time. I know that Super Mexican is Daniel. Won't forget that one after last night. Dr. Steve Rob, I can not give you a lot of information about catfish baits. It's a totally different type of fishing altogether. In general, I think you use stinky stuff on heavy rigs, and you just kind of cast it out and let it sit. Let the kiddies come to the bait. A little bit different type of fishing that's not my style and not similar to what you do to fish for bass. William Plunkett, what's up, bro? How are you doing? Doing pretty well myself. Appreciate you asking. Guggen Slayer, Taylor. My name is Tyler. Pleasure to meet you. I will hopefully remember that. Guggen Slayer is Taylor. Good name. Guys, I am not drinking a Coors Original tonight, but rather a San Pellegrino in the Aranciata, the orange flavor. This thing is banging. Super, super good. So, yeah, Dr. Steve, pretty sure, you can just rig it like you would a Carolina rig. And then instead of using a standard, hook and soft plastic bait, I think you use a treble hook and you throw a ball of dough and stinky food, hot dogs, and weird stuff like that, man. Unfortunately, I'm not the guy to give you advice on how to catch catfish, and you do have to throw it on heavier gear as well. So just do some simple research. Don't consult with people like me when it comes to catfishing, at least just yet. But I know some other YouTubers that are just generally into multi-species fishing, milliken fishing, for example. You can find some decent content about going for catfish. So check that out sometime. Justin says, could go for a cold one right about now. It's 120 degrees out in our plant right now. Holy shnikes, man. That's ridiculous. Oh, that sounds horrible, Justin. Sorry to hear that, man. Best YouTuber for fishing, is that a question, or are you just saying that you think milliken fishing is the best YouTuber for fishing? Because Ben Milliken is good, but but I would not necessarily argue that he's the best. So anyway, guys, we are going to get right into this in a few minutes. There's 8 people in here, just 2 thumbs up right now. Do me a quick favor, hit that thumbs up, and let's get right into this. Starting straight from the top. And so we're going to talk about the post-spawn period. And, quite literally, that's when bass move off of beds. It happens on such a wide spectrum, a long stretch of time. Down south, post-spawn can happen in February and March. And up north, post-spawn can be in July and August. So, Riley, what is up? Dr. Steve Rob, not sure if you're talking about Milliken fishing or what, but doesn't matter. Good channel. Riley, we are doing well, I think. How are you doing? So after the spawn, the fish are going to hang out for a couple of weeks near the beds, okay? Sorry, excuse me while I turn off my alarm real quick so it doesn't keep going off. So males will stay up very close to the beds and guard the fry. They will protect the new baby bass, and the females will either stay close by, but kind of on that first drop-off, where they've got easy access to deeper water, but also have easy access to the bed, are just kind of resting, relaxing, staying close-ish, but are going to be quicker to transition than the males. The males are going to be up and easier to catch. They're going to be more defensive, more aggressive in nature. So the way that you catch these bass tends to be just a little bit different. The way that you target males versus females, the way that you target bass that are up shallow and guarding fry and closer to beds versus fish that are kind of staging versus fish that have already gone out deep. So we're going to talk about that now. And what I'd love for you guys to do for me as we go through each bait is let me know if you have, first of all, if you like and throw that bait very frequently, and secondly, if you have a favorite brand of plastic or brand of lure, depending on what it is, and just chime in and participate to the actual conversation. Okay, guys? So, first and foremost, while we're thinking about and talking about bass up shallow, lethargic but hungry, right? The bass have been up shallow and protecting for a long time. They have not been focused on eating for a long time. So you get kind of this strange behavior where they're not super aggressive. They're not hunting all the time, but they can be triggered for sure. And they are opportunistic. So when something stupid comes by, they are going to eat it. They are focused on feeding up, but they don't necessarily have the energy that they do later in the year once they've fed back up and are healthy again. But after the spawn, the bass are going to be a little bit funky, we should say. So you want to throw baits that can move erratically but stay in the strike zone as long as possible. That is kind of the most important thing that I can tell you. And so we're going to start with a fluke. You can throw a hard jerk bait as well, but I think a soft plastic jerk bait, a fluke, is one of the best baits to throw during the post-spawn. It is one that is super erratic and tends to stay in the strike zone a little bit longer. So this is one of my favorites. This is the Strike King KVD Perfect Plastics Caffeine Shad. So the Caffeine Shad comes in a couple sizes. It's got this different body shape It's heavily salted. It does sink a little bit faster than like a Zoom Super Fluke. I do like to throw a Super Fluke as well. At this time of the year, I'm either going to throw a pearl or a bluegill or green pumpkin colored fluke. For the most part, those are going to be the only colors that I throw anyway, bluegill or shad. So there's not going to be a huge amount of variation. You'll see in my fluke box, I've got green pumpkin, white, bluegill, white, baby bass. So pretty simple when it comes to colors when throwing flukes. Now, this is a 5-inch soft plastic bait, so I've got it on a 5/0 Mustad triple grip. But ordinarily, I would throw like a Zoom Super Fluke on a 4/0 Gamakatsu EWG Superline hook. I throw these weightless. You know, you get just a little bit of weight from the heavier wire hook that you throw these on. And I'd throw it on anywhere from 12 to 15-pound fluorocarbon on, you know, this is a 610 medium heavy Shimano X-Age with an SLX reel on there. So fluke is number one on the list for me. Justin says, little off topic, but I live in North Wyoming, don't have many opportunities for bass. I do use ultra finesse bass gear to fish for trout and walleye. Cool, man. Yep. Surprisingly, I catch quite a few trout on micro bass jigs and small soft plastics. Yeah, I do too, man. Also fish the Ned on the regular. Yep, absolutely, Justin. I will do a stream sometime just talking about small baits that I also use for trout. I live in Colorado, so there's some good bass fishing here, but for the most part, trout, fly fishing for trout is kind of what we're known for here. So totally agree, but downsized presentations, small soft plastics, small jerk baits, small crankbaits can be killer on trout and on panfish, crappie, bluegill. So we'll talk about that another time, Justin, but appreciate you chiming in, even if it's a little bit off topic. William Plunkett said, gotta go. See y'all on the next one. Gotta wake up at 5 to go to Tyler, Texas. Okay, William. Sleep well, man. Have a good time. Travel safe, and good luck in Texas. Okay. Double fluke. Yeah. The donkey rig, guys. I don't throw the donkey rig very often, but that is a really cool idea, especially during the post spawn. We're going to get into talking about the shad spawn here in a little bit when we talk about some of these baits. And I do think that the double fluke, aka the donkey rig, does come into play during that time. I mean, you might as well double the opportunities. And the way that rig, you know, you literally rig 2 soft plastic jerk baits, you know, anywhere from a foot to 2 feet apart from each other, and they kind of do this darting, schooling bait fish look, and you can catch doubles on it. Sometimes they'll go for the front, sometimes they'll go for the back, but you know, I've seen challenges on YouTube where people are throwing 3, 4, 5 flukes, and that's kind of a silly thing, but anyway, the double fluke rig is underrated, so appreciate you mentioning that one. Let's move on to lure number 2, and that is a glide bait. A larger swim bait that is jointed, okay? So this is not a standard paddle tail swim bait that's going to have a big kick and a little bit of a body roll. This is not something that you're slow rolling on bottom or swimming straight through the water column, but rather a glide bait, a jointed swim bait that is going to essentially have a walk the dog action under the water. A glide bait is typically going to run in the upper portion of the water column, somewhere in the 0 to 3 feet of water. This is the Storm Arashi glide bait. It is a little bit heavier, something like maybe 3.5 ounces, 7 to 7.5 inches. This is a newer glide bait on the market, yet pretty affordable. Retails in the $35 to $40 range. And what makes it unique is that this bait can be worked in a lot of different ways. You can work it really fast, and it's gonna stay relatively tight, or you can work it slow, and it's gonna have that nice methodical gliding, wider swimming action. And you can twitch it, and of course it will spin and do a 180 for you. But compared to what is on the market and it competes with, this seems to blow away its competitors. Normally you'd spend about $100 or so on a bait like this. It does have swiveling hook hangers, so the fish do not have leverage of throwing the hook, which is a really cool feature. I've upgraded the trebles and the snap on this bait. And I will say I like to throw it on relatively heavy line, but not as crazy as some guys. So I've got this on a little bit of an intro swim bait setup. This is not expensive. The Dobyns Fury $7.95 swim bait rod. This retails at $129, and the reel is the Daiwa Tatula 200 TWS reel. This is a relatively low profile reel for having such a large line capacity. This is in a little bit faster gear ratio than I typically prefer, but throw this on 65-pound braid to a 20-pound monofilament leader, and that is my glide bait setup. So this pattern here is going to imitate a bass or a bluegill, which is mostly what I'm trying to imitate when I'm throwing a swim bait up shallow. Sometimes I might throw a shad pattern as well, depending on what time and what period of the post spawn we're in. Russ Dennis, what's up, bro? Good to have you in here. Hope you're doing well tonight. So Yak Angler, I feel bad calling you that. What's your name again, man? I should know your name, but it's not coming to me right now. Quinn. I don't know why that doesn't ring a bell as much to me, but all right, man, here are the two baits side by side. Pretty significant difference. Mostly in size, right? The S-Waver 168 is like, you know, 1.5 ounces. And here's one thing I want you to pay attention to is the amount that the joint bends over on its own, okay? A lot of people will shave down the S-Waver to make that action just a little bit more aggressive and make that swimming action wider. This guy here, goodness gracious, Russ, Dennis, Riley, you guys are getting up early. Sorry to hear it. We'll make this stream short again tonight, so no worries. But here's the deal, Quinn. Look at how much this bait falls over in comparison before it hits. The joint is a lot steeper, okay? So you get a much wider swim out of this bait. And of course, it's much bigger. So the S-Waver 200 would be most comparable to the Arashi Glide. And I would say they're very comparable size-wise. The S-Waver 200 is just going to be barely bigger. The Arashi Glide is a 190 size instead of 200. So it's like 7.5 versus 8 inches. And I think weight-wise, they're pretty similar. So that would be a little bit closer. The Arashi Glide is just a little bit cheaper than the S-Waver 200. So, yeah, pretty similar. But this was designed by some swim bait experts, some pros who work with the Arashi team. And so far, I'm impressed. So I don't have any S-Waver 200s in my arsenal, but probably need to do that at some point. The S-Wavers do not have swiveling hook hangers on them. So that's also one pretty big difference and one major advantage to the new Arashi Glide. Let me go turn off my AC because that's pretty loud, guys, and I apologize. Yeah, Quinn. The swim on the S-Waver can be frustrating, but in general, I think the S-Waver is better worked as like a twitch style bait than on a swim. Generally speaking, when fishing glide baits, I like to work them more like a jerk bait. You know, either a steady twitch, 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 twitch to get it to kind of cut side to side, or slower, kind of like you would with a walking bait. So anyway, I like to work a glide bait a little bit more aggressively with the rod than with the reel. But let me turn off this air for you guys real quick. All right. You're not hearing the AC. Okay, Ron. Well, it's still running right now, but it'll kick off in 1 second. Okay, guys. So we talked about the fluke, talked about the glide bait. If you notice with both of those baits, they tend to have a very wide, erratic action that is slower and stays in the strike zone longer. That is what I mentioned right up front. Did you hear that? Now it should be quieter. Audio should be better. AC just kicked off. So, lure number 3, square bill crankbait, guys. Square bill crankbait can be wicked once the water heats up enough. You know, early in the spring, a square bill, in my opinion, is just a little bit too wide wobbling, too erratic to catch them. So I prefer to throw, you know, a DT4 or a DT6, you know, a tighter, wobbling, silent crankbait. And then as the water warms up, I will start playing around. But I really like the Strike King KVD 1.5 and the Lucky Craft LC 1.5 as kind of my go-to top square bill crankbaits. And this one is just the standard gizzard shad color from Strike King. Pretty basic color pattern, very white, just white and black. And and I find that it stands out really well in the water. So if your water clarity is not fantastic, this white color, black back, can be awesome. I've actually upgraded both trebles on this bait. So I've got a BMC feathered treble on the back and a BMC hybrid bladed treble on the front. Caught a couple really good fish on this late last fall, and I expect it to be really good here in the next few weeks. So squarebill crankbait is a really good one. I like to throw both shad patterns and bluegill patterns, especially this time of year. So what about you guys? Squarebills? Ron says this 6 cents 50X. That's a good one for sure. I don't think I have any in my box, but definitely need to. Rust, I tried to look it up, but couldn't find anything on it, quite frankly. I did a research on Google, and I couldn't find anything. Where did they post it? So here's my shallow diving crankbait box. Things getting a little bit full. Down here, I've got my DT4s and DT6s. Here, I've got kind of my larger rattling square bills. There's some Norman baits and some wiggle warts. And then I've got all square bills on top. Mostly 1.5 and 2.5. As you can see, I've got reds, I've got chartreuses, and I've got shad and bluegill. So here is another color that I absolutely love, especially this year and more recently. This is the green gizzard shad from Strike King, and this is a much more translucent bait. You can't see in this light, but this thing is pretty see-through. Has like a little bit of a purple purple sheen to it from some angles, and then more of a green sheen to it from other angles. So really cool color there. I've got a couple of those in my box. And then I've got a lot of the Lucky Craft square bill. This BE Gill color is just super classic, easy to go to. So that and this shad pattern could get it done for you, no problem. So what kind of square bills do you guys like to throw? And again, this time of year, I'm usually going to throw a silent square bill instead of, say, this rattling bluegill pattern. This is just going to make a little bit more ruckus, and I'll typically throw that later in the year. But Riley, you out of here? Okay. Appreciate you hopping on for a few minutes. Hope you have a great rest of your night, Riley. Sleep well. Have a good day tomorrow. We'll see you next time. Quinn says, I use the River to Sea square bill. I think that's called the Biggie, right? You have one on most of the year. Interesting. Russ, I will check out 13 over on Instagram, but I thought I did, man. Maybe it's still up there. I'll check it out. Russ says, I fished my first square bill last week. Are you supposed to fish it kind of like a jerkbait? No, you're not. So you can throw it on somewhat similar line or a somewhat similar setup, I guess. But no, I throw my square bills. I didn't mention my setup there, but that is my shallow diving crankbait setup. So a much softer rod, not necessarily softer than a jerkbait rod, but I'm going to throw it on about 12-pound test, and with a square bill, what you're trying to do is get it to deflect off of something. Ideally, a piece of cover, but it could be even just getting it a little bit hung in some grass and ripping it free. So generally speaking, a square bill is going to run in the 3 to 5 foot depth range. So you want to fish water that is in the 2 to 5 feet so that you are pretty much making contact with the bottom. If you're not making contact with the bottom and whatever's on it, you want to be running into stumps or laydowns, or, dock pilings or kind of anything. But a square bill is made to hit something and then deflect and go offline. There are very few square bills made that naturally have a hunting action and will just kind of veer off and then come back to center. Some are made to do that, but very few. So Russ says, man, it seems like it was all over the place. Seemed like it was flipping on its side a lot. Yeah, it could be the line tie. You might want to take a peek at those actual baits. Usually you're going to have a split ring on the front, but the line tie up here, that piece of metal, is going to be the first thing that you want to look at. The piece of metal that is attached to the lip can sometimes be bent to the side, and if it is, it's going to cause the bait to run in that direction. So what you often need to do to tune a crankbait is bend that line tie so that it is totally straight, and that will change the way that the bait runs. So, golly, I can hear some Livingston baits croaking inside one of my tackle boxes right now. Russ is throwing 15-pound Seaguar and Bizex. That's great line. 15-pound might be just a little bit overkill for a square bill, but that's totally fine. Only thing is it's going to make it run a little bit more shallow, but I usually don't find that that's an issue. Just having a square bill run in the 2, 3, 4 foot range. So definitely take a look at that line tie. But what type of square bill is it, Russ? Generally speaking, you're going to want to cast it out there, crank it down pretty quick so it gets down to depth, and then more like a steady, like a medium retrieve. Just crank, 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 wait until you feel something, and then pause, wait for it to back out. Most square bills are going to be pretty buoyant. So once it deflects, you pause, wait for it to back out, and then start your retrieve again. And it's usually when it hits and then stops, that sort of stunned type of action is what gets Bass to lash out. So, Quinn, yes, they still make wiggle warts for sure, man. They just they make them a little different now. I can't tell you what exactly is different about the material or the mold or what, but there is definitely a difference between the original Storm wiggle warts and the new ones. Once Storm, I think, sold to Rapala, that was one of those molds that got, messed with. So the original wiggle warts can go for, I don't know, $50 or more per bait. But the new wiggle warts, yeah, I mean, they're $5, $6 a pop, and they're good baits. They run good, they sound good, but some, especially crankbait fishermen from, say, the Midwest, who are all about fishing mid-depth crankbaits, they would swear by OG wiggle warts. And so maybe what you have is an OG, and it could be worth the big bucks. So hold on to that, man. I might have to go track down that bait that is chirping at me. It's killing me. Oh, I've got a couple of Livingston baits, and I swear sometimes this kills me. coming from this box. Russ says the Vexen Deep Thud. I've never heard of that. Did you get it out of like a mystery tackle box? Vexen sounds like one of those brands that they put in their boxes. By the way, Quinn, there's one of those wiggle words for you. Here's the new deal. This is the Rapala stuff that is balsa on the inside and plastic on the outside. You get the best of both worlds. You get the buoyancy and the action of balsa wood, but you get the durability of plastic. So BX Brat is the name of that bait right there. Russ Dennis. Yeah, man. The Vexen Deep Thud. Probably not the best square bill crankbait if I'm just guessing. So I would go out and get you a Strike King KVD 1.5 square bill, okay, or a Lucky Craft LC 1.5. The Strike King's going to run like, $5 or $6, and the Lucky Craft is going to be $6 or $7. And they're both great baits, not very expensive, and they're going to run true for you. You're not going to have any issues when you open it and tie it on. So, yeah, unfortunately, that is the reality with a lot of those off-name brands. It is a copy, and it might not be made very well. So, sorry to hear that, man. Let's move on to bait number 4, and now talk a little bit more about the shad spawn. This time of the year, right after the bass spawn, the shad and the bluegill are going to do some spawning themselves. The bluegill usually spawn like around the first full moon of the summer. So that was a few weeks ago. The bluegill should have been spawning, generally speaking, across the country. The shad spawn happens a little bit more frequently, and I think it's on a monthly basis, but the shad will come up shallow and spawn up against riprap and other pieces of rocky hardcover or clay, and they're usually spawning in low light periods. So last light, first light, and even during the middle of the night is when the shad are going to spawn. So if you see it happening, you will see them flickering on the surface, and you'll know what it is. But an awesome bait to throw during the shad spawn is a spinnerbait. Okay, a spinnerbait imitates a shad really well. It imitates a small school of shad. And the cool thing is, if you fire a spinnerbait out there around where you see flickering shad, a lot of times what will happen is you'll actually feel the shad trying to spawn with your bait. They will start bumping up into the blades of your bait. So, it's a very effective bait that will oftentimes draw attention when you need it most. So if you just threw, a finesse swim bait out there, or a standard swim jig, something pretty basic, you're usually not going to draw enough attention to get the bass to want to eat what you're throwing versus any other fish in the school. So a lot of times a swim bait can be awesome, but around when the shad are spawning, usually not the deal. So a spinnerbait is a sweet little deal. Sometimes I like to do a variation of like a swim bait with an underspin instead of an actual spinnerbait, but tough to beat a spinnerbait itself. Pretty funny, Quinn. Yeah, man, pretty weird to have that happen, but it's just one of those things. The shad, if you see the shad spawning, it is funky looking, especially gizzard shad. The way that they're just doing their thing way up in the shallows and mucking up the water with their stuff. It's kind of weird, but it's also intimidating just seeing all of the bait, not bait, but shad, if you will, just all over the place. You wonder where the bass must be, and it can either be absolutely killer or it can be absolutely frustrating. So spinnerbait is probably the go-to lure of choice when you see the shad spawning. Another good one when you see shad flickering on the surface is a topwater walking bait. Kind of like the same thing that I talked about earlier, a walking bait is going to stay in the strike zone a little bit longer. So where that spinnerbait, like a square bill, is going to cover more water and come in and out of the strike zone much quicker, a topwater walking bait you can throw just past where the school is, and you can work it right over the top, nice and slow, stop it, keep it going, stop it. There's a lot of different ways that you can work a walking bait. You can work it nice and fast, you can work it nice and slow and wider, or you can work it with some pauses in between. And so a walking bait, when you see fish busting on the surface or you see flickering shad, is a great way to go. Brian Waterman, what is up, bro? Good to see you in here. Hope you're doing well tonight. We are just talking about top 10 post-spawn baits. We are about halfway through. So you missed a soft plastic jerk bait or a fluke, glide bait, specifically, jointed swim bait, a square bill crankbait, a spinner bait, and now a topwater walking bait, specifically around the shad spawn. Did I talk about walking baits the other night? I think I did. And I thought I covered some of my favorites, but I'm not sure. Here's a really good one. This is the River to Sea Rover. This is the 128 size. It's a big bait, but it's got 3 treble hooks on it. Really well made. Listen to the dual sounds coming from there. So you get that loud knock, and you also get those tinny, high-pitched rattles in the head. So you get 2 sounds. You get holographic foil. You get a cupped lip. This thing walks. It pops. It does kind of everything you need it to. This bait was designed after the Reaction Innovations Vixen, I believe. Really good bait. Lucky Craft Gunfish is a good one. You get a somewhat similar sound profile with that one. The the OG in the walking bait category. It's tough to talk about walking baits without mentioning or giving credit to the old Super Spook, which is this guy right here. Very very basic cigar-shaped walking bait. Good Lord. You know, this is why I put these on here, is so I have less of these problems. And meanwhile, it's giving me more problems. All right. Good Lord. Neighbors are firing off, popping off some fireworks. So here's the Super Spook. Get a little bit more subtle of a sound. Classic action. It's basic, right? Since then, there have been a lot of evolutions, adjustments to topwater baits. I prefer walking baits with 3 hooks instead of 2. This is the new 6th Sense Catwalk, which has a hole-shaped or more V-style bottom, which is less common on the market these days, but reminds me a lot of, like, now this is a 2-hook bait, but the Rapala Skitter V has that V bottom to it. So that's what it kind of reminds me of. Brian, the cost on what? The River to Sea Rover? I want to say about $15. I'm not totally sure. It's a great bait, though. And they make it in a couple sizes. So yeah, I just briefly mentioned that, but you want to pay attention to the size of the bait and the number of hooks that it comes with. If the bait is smaller than 4 inches or 100 millimeters, it's fine to have 2 hooks on it. But if it's in between, if it's larger than that, I would make sure that it has 3 hooks on it. There are some walking baits that are, you know, 110, 120 millimeters long and only have 2 hooks on them. I would not do that. But, yeah, Brian, check out that River to Sea Rover 128. Really good walking bait. And like I said, it's super versatile. Has that that cupped face. So it will spit. It will walk. It will pop if you want it to. Generally, I'm walking the bait, but it has great color patterns, great action, and it's heavy. You can bomb that thing out. So with a walking bait, with most topwater baits, you want distance. So the same goes with a frog, and I think we're going to talk about a frog here in a few minutes. But let's move on from walking baits and talk about another topwater, and that is the Whopper Plopper. You know, it was tough not to mention this as like my very first bait on the list, but in my opinion, the Whopper Plopper is the best post-spawn bait on the list, just period. Brian says, I like what you did with that soft plastic popper last night. Nice DIY lure. Hey, appreciate it. Yeah, I didn't really get much of a reaction out of people when I showed both of my homemade creations, the soft plastic popper and the homemade sprinkler frog. But anyway, I appreciate the comment there, Brian. I think it's a pretty cool deal too, and I was happy to have gotten a chance to get out on the water with it and see how it actually works and see that it works well, and that it floats and it's got great action to it, and those blades don't interfere with the hook or with each other, and I'm pretty excited about it. I love that it is a line through. So only thing is I might want to change the hook from an EWG to a round bend. But Whopper Plopper, guys. Whopper Plopper. I talked about it last night, and I'm going to say the same thing. The cool thing about the Whopper Plopper over most other top water baits is that there are just so many ways to work the bait. Most people are going to work a propeller style lure like this on a straight retrieve the majority of the time, and that's just kind of the way that it goes. But let's just say you are doing that. There is kind of an ideal retrieve speed. I would not say Whopper Ploppers are speed sensitive in that they're not going to be ineffective if you're running it slower than ideal or faster than ideal. But here's what happens. When you're running a Whopper Plopper slow, it makes kind of like a plop, 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 plop. When you start running it faster, it goes plop, 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 plop. As you go faster and faster, then it gets higher pitch. And it starts to kind of blow out. The sound gets overwhelming in a way that's almost too high pitched, and it doesn't sound like a real plop anymore. So in my opinion, a medium fast retrieve with the Whopper Plopper when a straight retrieve, so that it's got that kind of, it will sound loudest and most aggressive. You will be able to tell. So not creeping it, but not burning it is the right speed. But like I said, you can do more than a straight retrieve. I really like this on a stop and go retrieve where 2 or 3 times throughout the retrieve, I will stop the bait. So I will bomb this thing out as far as I can. The 110 size weighs a little bit over an ounce and can be cast a mile. So I will wait some 5 or 10 seconds after it hits the water to start my retrieve. And then, every 10 or 15 cranks of the reel, I'm going to stop the bait for about a half a second and then start it back up. And the thing is, as that bait's coming overhead, either the fish are watching it or they're coming up to inspect it, or they're following behind. And when that bait stops, the fish are forced to make a decision. They were either just lazily paying attention or they were tracking it or whatever, and all of a sudden they have to decide. So they either bail off, they lose attention, or they go for it. And I find that you often get hit right when you start that retrieve back up after the pause. So that has been one of my most effective ways to fish the Whopper Plopper. And lastly, you can work this thing like a popper or like a standard prop bait and pull it. Short distances, pulls of the rod will move this bait anywhere from 1 to 5 feet at a time, just with a pretty cool way to work the bait as well if you're in a shorter area where the fish are likely to be. So Whopper Plopper in the 110 size specifically is my go-to. I do like the 130 as well, but you have to step up your gear in terms of what you're throwing it on. It's kind of the same conversation we had last night about the rats. This 40 size rat is my favorite because it's big enough to have a large profile, but small enough to be manageable on normal gear. You can throw it on a medium heavy or heavy power setup without having to really step up your stuff to like a swim bait extra heavy type of setup. So anyway, hopefully that kind of answers your question, Brian. And Miguel, you're absolutely right. It's kind of what I mentioned. Stop and go is perhaps my favorite way to retrieve a Whopper Plopper. So Brian, next to the 110, the 75 is probably my favorite size just because it can be thrown on any type of gear and is super versatile. But like I've mentioned before, if you are throwing that smaller 75, in my opinion, you want to step down the gear that you're throwing it on so that you have a little bit more control over the bait. If you've got too stiff of a rod, the lighter whopper ploppers won't quite have the same action. You won't be able to feel it in your rod. What's wrong, Ron? Brian, sometimes I do that. It depends on when and where I am. If I know I'm going to be fishing a plopper on that rod all day, and I might be switching sizes, but that's my plopper setup, then yes, I am going to do that ahead of time. I'll throw a swivel on because that is a big deal. And I've had a couple days where my plopper setup just got trashed due to that reason. If you make a long cast and your bait gets a little bit of grass stuck on it, and it fouls up the prop, and the prop cannot spin, then the bait will spin the entire retrieve back, and that can cause huge problems very quickly. So, yes, I know that people recommend it, and I sometimes do it, but to be honest with you, I'm a bank fisherman, and I usually try to err on the side of versatility, and so I'm usually using the same setup for other techniques as well, and I don't carry swivels on me and in my terminal tackle box the majority of the time. So anyway, hopefully that answers your question. I don't do it all the time, but I do recommend it. So Ron Hall, he can't wrap his head around this, even though the fish crush this thing. You know, I caught a handful of fish on this exact bait just last week. I posted a picture on Instagram last night of one of those catches. So this is the Morning Dawn colored BBZ1 rat in the size 40 from Spro. Very, very, very good bait. Okay. Miguel says, I only use swivels for rooster tails. Fair enough. Purple's the deal. Yeah, Brian. And yes, it does, Quinn. The Spro rat has an undeniable action. I showed you guys last night, but just listen to the body clack. You can hear this thing the entire retrieve back. Absolutely deadly. I mean, it has become kind of my favorite night fishing bait. Just over the whopper plopper, and I love that you can fish it so freaking slow. I get a ton of bites very close to the bank. You know, right at the end of a retrieve on the rat. So, yeah, man, Miguel, it's a really, really good bait. So let's move on from the whopper plopper and talk about a bait that I don't like to throw very often, but you got to throw them. You got to have them. You can't not have them. Obviously, I don't care where they are, ever. Can you guess? Can you guess? I don't know where the hell they are, but I guess I'll have to find them another time. The old Senko, guys. Quinn, I've caught a ton of fish on this bait. I don't know how well you can see, but this thing has a ton of marks all over it, and the tail is about to fall apart. But yeah, this one has gotten eaten quite a lot. I've probably caught 50 fish on this one size 40 bait, and I fished the 30 a lot too. I showed you guys last night that smaller size. So that 40 I would put in the same category as the 110 Whopper Plopper size-wise and what I fish it on. Now, the size 30 rat, and you can see this one has been bit a fair amount too. And this is just the brown. I've got it in the Morning Dawn as well. This one hasn't been chewed up quite as much, but this 30 size rat I would put in the same category as the Whopper Plopper 75. So anyway, those are awesome baits. Wait, Riley's back. So Riley, when did you leave? We were talking about glide baits. Then we talked about square bills. Then we talked about the shad spawn, spinner baits, topwater walking baits, and Whopper Ploppers. And now we're going to talk about Senkos. But yeah, you didn't miss a ton, Riley, so no worries. Quinn says, oh, have you caught anything on the bat yet? Yeah, dude. I took this out last week for the first time, and I caught 3 fish on it. Or I guess that was this week, just like a few days ago. So I've caught 3 fish on this size 40 bat. This is a 4-inch. I have the larger 5-inch bat, but have not thrown it yet. But that's this guy right here. I asked you guys last night if you were interested in me throwing a bat into the giveaway for next month, for July. And I'm pretty sure you guys said no, which was weird. So oh gosh, Ron. Yeah, you're right, Miguel. The 30 size definitely does fish more like a crankbait than the 40. The 40 fishes like a wake bait. It wants to stay up on the surface. The 40 and the 50 do a lot better as wake baits. The 30 and the 25 definitely want to swim subsurface. But I haven't had many issues with that. I find that I get just as many bites when it's fishing or swimming subsurface. But that's just me. Brian says, can you see that rat at night if the moon is full? Of course, dude. You can see it when the moon is not full. So, yeah. The rat it just makes such a wake on the water that you can see it from a long ways away. Dude, same with, a Whopper Plopper. They make such a disturbance on the surface that yes, you certainly can, especially during the full moon. So Riley's saying, sweet, I can get my hands on some Gary Senkos. I don't throw Gary Yamamoto Senkos very often. I will tell you what, I am a huge, huge fan of the Bass Pro Stickos, okay? Like a big fan. All right, and I like some of these color patterns that they have. This is half green pumpkin, half black with red flake. I also like the one that is half green pumpkin, half watermelon red. But generally speaking, I just really like the value that you get out of the Bass Pro Sticko. And here's the thing. When it comes to a stick bait soft plastic, I like bigger. They make them in a 3-inch and 4-inch, tiny little guys that are awesome on drop shots and super finessey presentation. The 5-inch is probably the most common size Senko. It is what everybody throws. Okay, 5-inch stick bait. Just look at how poorly that would never happen with Yamamoto quality control. But a 5-inch stick bait is kind of what everybody has learned to throw. You can Texas rig it, you can wacky rig it, kind of do whatever you want, and it is small enough to get bit by anything. Senkos will catch everything. But I personally just like to step it up and go with a 6-inch. I like the fall and the action. Tends to just fall a little bit faster and have more aggressive action than a 5-inch does. Like the presence of a 6-inch is significantly greater than a 5-inch. The 7-inch Senko is ridiculous. It's huge. I think overkill. The 6-inch, in my opinion, is big enough to scare away little fish, but still small enough to catch fish in numbers. So I like to go with the 6-inch Senko, and I like to throw it on a weighted wacky rig a lot of the time. But otherwise, I'm just throwing it with an O-ring and, a wacky rig. So wacky rig Senko is an easy way to catch them. Russ Dennis, no problem, dude. Have a good rest of your night. Appreciate you hanging out, man. I will definitely... Wait, I didn't see the link that you put on the chat. Sorry, man. I'll try to look that up. But what was the link that you left? And Quinn, I totally agree, man. I don't know if you could feel the lack of enthusiasm in my voice when talking about Senkos, but yeah, I just, it's almost like throwing live bait for me. Like it's not fun to throw Senkos. It seems like usually when I do whip them out, I catch some fish, but it doesn't seem like a challenge, and it doesn't seem it's not fun or interesting, and so I don't do it very frequently. But I know a lot of guys who just are big kind of 1-2 punch type of guys. They'll throw a frog and a Senko, and they're good to go. But that's usually not me. So Miguel, we're on the same page, man. Quinn, we're on the same page. Justin is in the house. Justin caught a bass, guys. Justin says, I did it, but then didn't let everybody know that he caught his first bass of his life just this past week. So congratulations, Justin. Way to go, man. Remind us one more time, where were you fishing? How were you fishing? How did you catch that fish, man? Brian says, how much salt do they have, and how do they sink compared to a Senko? So the Bass Pro Shop Stickos are a very close resemblance to a Yamamoto Senko. They have a similar amount of salt in them. They fall just a hair slower than a Senko does. Okay? But on the opposite end of the spectrum, the Yum Dinger falls super slow. And say the what's the other one that is on the opposite end? The Berkley General, Riley. The Power Bait General is an awesome stick bait, but it falls faster than a Senko. super, super fast fall. So that's something that you want to take into consideration. Some of it is your fishing style, and some of it is the behavior of the bass. So if you're throwing a stick bait, it's kind of nice to have a variety. But I think right in the middle, in terms of salt, action, and best value of the bunch, is that Bass Pro Sticko. It is fatter than a Yum Dinger, and a little bit less durable because it's got better action. It falls much faster, and they're cheap AF, dude. I mean, here's the reason that I really end up going with those is I told you I throw the 6-inch, not the 5-inch. If, for example, Yamamoto, they sell their baits in 10 to a pack with the 3-inch, 4-inch, 5-inch. Once you step up to the 6-inch, you only get 5 per pack, and you're still paying $7 or $8 for a pack. So instead of spending 70 or 80 cents a bait, all of a sudden you're spending like $1.50 per stick bait, and that, in my opinion, is hard to swallow. So the Bass Pro Shop Sticko baits you can get for 16 to a pack for like $6 or $7. So the baits are more than twice as cheap compared to Yamamoto Senkos. So just my opinion, the bass are not necessarily biting it because of the subtle differences between a Senko and a Sticko, but rather because of the profile, the fall, the slow action, and the easy meal that a stick bait represents. But that's just my opinion. I prefer not to throw them very often. So hopefully that answers your question, Brian. Miguel says I just grab a trick worm. That is that's fine, but totally different deal. The trick worm does not have salt in it. It wants to float. I would throw a trick worm on a Nico rig, on a shaky head, on a Carolina rig, weightless, throwing like a fluke, but I would not throw it like a Senko. So anyway, Justin says Rapala Shad Rap, the lake that's a mile from me, and was chucking it next to some bushes. Right on. Shad Rap is a good jerk bait. Good for you, man. Were you just chucking and winding, or were you twitching it? How were you working the jerk bait? Were you pausing it at all, or were you swimming it on a straight retrieve? Either way, man, congrats a bunch on that first bass. Keep it up, dude. Hopefully that builds a little bit of confidence for you. If I were you, I'd start playing around and throwing different things. Like try a fluke, for example. You'll be able to catch a lot of the same fish in same areas, but with more confidence that you can throw it up in the nasty of cover and without much of a worry. You know, worst comes to worst, you do get hung up and you have to break it off, but you lose a hook and a soft plastic bait, you know, that adds up to maybe $2 instead of losing, you know, a $6, $8, $10 lure with treble hooks on it. So anyways, to keep in mind as you're getting more into bass fishing, start throwing soft plastics, man. Your confidence will go up just because of the weedlessness and the affordability. Good question, Brian. I am not quite sure. I will keep you guys posted here in the next week. But I am sure Tackle Warehouse is going to do a standard sale. Pretty much everywhere should have deals in the 10-15% off range. But I will keep my eyes posted, my eyes and ears peeled, and I will keep you posted. All right, let's move on to next bait on the list. We got 3 more, guys. So Wacky Rig Senko is tough to beat. Of course, you could use a Texas rigged Senko too, but I think the action of a Wacky Rig is oftentimes going to get lethargic post-spawn bass to come over and grab that easy meal. So anywhere, I'm going to work a Senko kind of like I would with a pitching or flipping bait. I'm going to toss it out there and let it fall to bottom. Maybe lift it and drop it once or twice. But otherwise, I'm just bringing it back and making another flip out there and expecting all of my bites to come on the initial fall. So these last 3 baits are going to be a little bit more situation specific, but when you get into situations where, say, you've got more matted grass, you've got more pads, you have froggy vegetation, okay? You're not going to be able to throw a lot of the lures that we've already talked about, especially the ones like the glide bait, this square bill, this spinner bait, the top water baits, pretty much any of those you're not going to be able to throw. You might be able to pitch a Wacky Rig Senko into some holes, and you might be able to work a fluke in some areas, but otherwise, when you get up into matted grass, in the shallows, that is a hot spot for a lot of bass to hang out in, especially in the post-spawn, because it's going to be close enough to where those spawning flats were, to where they're going to be hanging out close by, but they're going to have the shade and the temperature advantage from being under those mats of grass, but close to ambush points. So anyway, you want to look for that and pull out a moving frog. A sprinkler frog or a buzz toad are going to be some of your best bets. So this is another one of those situations where you want to cover water but stay in the strike zone as long as possible. Yes, Brian, a swim jig in grass, a chatterbait, both great options, but like I just mentioned, probably a little bit too fast for this time of year. So in the post spawn, I'm wanting something that's moving just a little bit slower. Once we get into full-blown summer, a swim jig in the grass is one of my absolute favorite baits to throw. But usually at this time, I'm not quite throwing a swim jig. Swim jig is going to just have that much less resistance than, say, a spinnerbait. But like I said, a spinnerbait is about as fast as I want to be moving this time of year. So I'll show you guys that homemade bait again from last night. That got no love but should have. Tell me what I should put on these legs. I've been thinking about maybe putting some like Colorado spinner blades instead of soft plastic with the right now I've got the CPS spring and these Ultra Vibe Speedworm tails screwed onto those CPS springs. So this is just like a sprinkler frog type of deal with 2 kickers on the back. And so a sprinkler frog or something like that you can keep moving is going to be ideal. And frog is going to do a better job than a buzz bait of not getting hung up in the grass. You can also throw a toad. This is the Kitech noisy flapper. Kicks a lot on the surface. I also like the rage toad, the horny toad. There's a lot of good options when it comes to toad baits. And you can rig this on a double hook or a single hook. But generally speaking, you're going to work this a lot quicker on the surface. Just like a buzz bait, you can't really pause this thing as much. It is going to sink, but can get some great blow-ups. Can throw this into some really nasty cover. So when you see matted grass, I would think frogs and toads. Ryan, what's up, dude? Went camping and fishing all day? Right on, man. Good for you. We are almost at the end here, Ryan, so sorry to tell you that, but good to see you in here, man. You think I should throw a sprinkler frog tail on there? Initially, that was my idea, but what I want to do is do that with a frog that has just one single tail instead of, a traditional frog that's got two. So initially, I actually put two sprinkler frog tails on, one on each of these, but they're big and they hit each other a lot. So they actually don't want to turn very much. So this was one of the first things that I thought of. You could put, ordinary swim bait tails on the back. You could throw curly tail or straight tail worms. And like I said, you could throw spinner blades. That's probably what I am most likely to do. But I'd love to know if you guys have other thoughts and ideas of accessories to throw on the back. Teckle is really the company that has done that for the most part. They started with the Sprinker, with the paddle tail. Then they went to the Maracker with the rattling, one thing on the back, just that rattle. And now they've got some with, metal feet that spin and make a whole lot of ruckus. They do a lot of different things. So ribbon tail, Brian, yeah, that's a pretty good option for sure. Okay, so let's move on. Next situation. So moving away from grass and going to, say, brush. If you've got a lot of timber, a lot of lay down trees, a lot of logs, tough to beat a Texas rig. It doesn't matter what time of year it is, but also applies to the post spawn. So Texas rig, especially a worm. You could throw a straight tail or a ribbon tail worm. But yeah, I think ribbon tail is one of the OGs. I wanted to see if I had this easy access to show you guys, but I probably don't. So anyway, classic bait to throw, something like the 7-inch power worm. 10-inch power worm would be awesome too. I often prefer it over the 7, but the 7 is just such a go-to bait. This is the green pumpkin chartreuse tail. And yeah, ribbon tail worm is kind of tough to beat, but you could throw anything with the bluegill profile and pretty much get away with it. Soft plastic bait, Texas rig, in and around brush, and you're good to go. So I would usually throw a light-ish weight, something like a quarter or a 5/16, maybe up to 3/8, but usually that's going to be a kind of the way that I go. So Texas rig worm is usually the way that I'm going to go. Okay, last bait, somewhat similar type of presentation, but when you're not around brush, but rather the fish are out deep, say these fish are not staying shallow, they're not protecting any longer, you know that they've moved out deep, a super effective rig, and it can even work shallow too, is the old-fashioned Carolina rig. I will admit I am not very old-fashioned. You already heard me. I don't throw a spinner bait very frequently. I don't throw a buzz bait very frequently. So, of course, I don't throw a Carolina rig very frequently. But as you can imagine, I do throw a variation of the Carolina rig from time to time. So what I'll just do is throw kind of the double bobber stop rig. I'll throw a bobber stop, a bullet weight, or 2 bullet weights, another bobber stop, and then whoosh, couple feet down, I'll throw. So instead of using glass beads, egg sinkers, swivels, and having a whole Carolina rig box and setup for it, I'm just getting a little bit creative and changing that Texas rig to a Carolina rig with the help of 1 extra bobber stop. So usually on a Carolina rig, again, I'm going to throw either a worm or a creature bait. A lizard is pretty tough to beat. Really like the Reaction Innovations Man Bear Pig. Really like this bait. I've got it 2 packs in this same color right now, simply because it was so hard to get a hold of last year. This color was out of stock for the majority of the year. And it's called Warmouth. It has a little bit of everything in it, but it resembles a crawdad, a bluegill, kind of anything you want it to, and it's awesome. So the Man Bear Pig is a little bit like a brush hog, and a little bit like a lizard. Man Bear Pig is a really good one. So Carolina rig is going to be the last one on the list, guys. There are a lot of other baits that you could throw around the post-spawn, but that is going to wrap up the list. I'll go through it one more time just to sum up. More erratic, slower moving baits that can get bass to lash out and stay in the strike zone a little bit longer are going to be the most effective. So soft plastic jerk baits, aka flukes, or floating worms, are first on the list. Large swim bait, specifically glide baits, are second on the list. Square bill crankbaits are third on the list. Spinner baits are fourth. Topwater walking baits, whopper ploppers, wacky rigged Senkos as you start to slow down. And then once you get into cover specific situations around grass, I really like a toad or a sprinkler type of frog. Around brush, I really like a Texas rig, specifically a worm, usually one with a ribbon tail. And then lastly, I like a Carolina rig out deep, either with a worm or a creature bait on it. So that is going to do it for the list. Let's just open up the conversation for a few minutes before I sign off of here. But hope you guys enjoyed that. Didn't quite get as much interaction from you guys, but not a big deal whatsoever. We're an hour and a half in, and I just finished the list. So Brian says, how high does the bait come off the bottom when you drag a Carolina rig? Dude, I'd say ballpark 6 inches. Now, it depends on the leader that you're running, right? But usually on a Carolina rig, you're going to run a leader, ballpark 2 feet. If you run it much longer than that, it gets really hard to cast the rig. So just keep that in mind. So once you pull it, that bait is maybe, depending on how much current is in the water, that bait might go up a foot. It's very rare that it's going to go whoops straight up and then fall back down. It's really going to pull behind and kind of go with the current. It's going to stay low. So and yeah, standard length, I would say somewhere in that 18 to 24 inch would be my guess, but I don't know for sure. Riley says, found any new baits you want to try out? Good question. There are a lot of new baits coming out soon. ICAST would be like in the next couple of weeks. ICAST has been hit or miss the last few years in terms of innovation and new products being released. But Z-Man has 2 new chatterbaits coming out. I'm pretty excited about those. One is their stealth, just a clear blade. So my guess is that it's somewhat like the Naked Rage blade. I'll be curious to see what the material of the blade itself is, just how thick that plastic is, because you're flirting with a different type of lure there. The thinner the plastic, the more it becomes like a scrounger head, and the thicker it is, the more it is like a chatterbait. But if it's plastic and not metal, I wonder what that action will be like. So I'm curious to try that one for sure. And then they also are coming out with a cross eyes chatterbait as well. So the cross eyes series of jigs all have these painted crossed eyes on them, but they're really well-made jigs, all with really good hooks and good brush guards on them. And so they're coming out with a chatterbait that it's that flippin' style jig with a weed guard on it. So Z-Man does not make a lot of chatterbaits that are made to be weedless or have weed guards on them, because naturally a chatterbait does have a blade in the front and is relatively weedless. It's not very woodless. It will roll over and snag on wood very easily, but I've always loved the idea of chatterbaits with weed guards on them. This was the very first chatterbait that I made with this Queen Tackle switchblade, that you can put on any old lure with a vertical line tie. I went straight to the 6th Sense Divine swim jig. Absolutely love the weed guard on that. The medium wire hook on there. Decided to screw in an underspin blade, and you got this wicked spinner chatter deal, and I love that. So anyway, yeah, Riley, 2 chatterbaits, and 13 Fishing is releasing a million new baits, and I'm not quite sure how I feel about them. 6th Sense is kind of steadily pushing out new lures, and I have so far been a fan of everything that they're putting out. So yeah, I'm not totally sure, but it'll be interesting to see kind of what comes out. And of course, you guys will be some of the first to hear as I hear about them, as I get my hands on them. I'll show you. Brian says the shell cracker lure looks cool. I want to try that. You mean the soft plastic shell cracker? Isn't that made by Strike King? I don't know. It's not new. Or do you mean the Black Dog Baits G2 shell cracker? Totally a different lure. That's a swim bait, and it's relatively expensive, I think. Okay, yeah. So I haven't tried the shell cracker. I've definitely heard of them a number of times, and I know that Black Dog Baits has a really good reputation. So I'm sure that it's worth a shot, and definitely would be fun to have in the arsenal, but would probably feel a little bit more like a collector's item being from Black Dog. But nothing wrong with that, dude. It's just a $35 wake bait that is what it is. So, Justin, what's that swim bait on your left above the yellow packaging? This one right here, or this one right here? These are the Megabass Mag Draft Freestyle. It looks a little funny because this is a mixed pack. Ordinarily, these come in 2 to a pack, but I consolidated once I got down to them. So, you take one out of the package and you rig it and hang it up on the wall. So It's just kind of what happens. But the Magdraft Freestyle is awesome. Really, really good soft plastic swim bait, especially for the price. Falls into the exact same range as this bait here and this bait here. So runs in that sort of $6 per bait before it's rigged. Magdraft Freestyle is an awesome bait. $12 for 2 soft plastic swim baits. It takes a 6/0 owner beast. And yeah, definitely one of my favorite soft plastic swim baits these days. Caught my first bass of 2020 on this guy right here, on one of my first casts of the day with it a couple months ago. Okay, Riley. Hope you get some better sleep. Sweet dreams. See you next time. God bless you too. Okay, guys, any other questions before I dip out of here? I will try and be back on in the next couple of nights. Be a little bit better of a communicator and let you know when I'll be on next. I will definitely be on next weekend, say next Friday, but not quite sure if I'll be on again before that. Check out this rig right here, guys. This is a little bit of a secret slash sleeper rig that I've recently made by playing around. So this is a backwards rigged tube, but it's got the weight in the head. So check this out. I've got a Mustad triple grip or grip pin EWG style hook rigged in the tail of the tube. So it's not set in anything, but that grip pin or the that keeper really holds the plastic up on there. But inside the bait, I've got these Yamamoto tube weights. And check out what they look like. So literally, I just have that shoved up in the head here, and then I can bring the point of the hook through that hole of the weight. So the weight is fixed here in the head of the tube. Does not impede the hook set, especially with this Z-Man Elastec that will get right out of the way. So really cool deal there. I also threw a little rattle in the middle of the tube, so get that added sound. Can expose that, and really cool rig here. Justin, do they make the Megabass in the perch color? Yeah, I just showed you that, bro. This is called perch. The color is called perch. As you can see, this is pretty translucent perch compared to the Beast Coast. This is the Creep 6.5 in their, JG's Dirty Perch or whatever it's called. This Megabass perch color is quite translucent, but really nice. So yeah, they do, and I like it. Caught a couple good fish on it last year, but then lost the bait. Haven't rigged up this second one just yet. So what's another DIY lure, Ron? I don't know what I just showed you. All right, guys. If you don't have any other questions, I'm going to dip out of here. Tim Dunn, you made it to the live stream, but I am dipping out of here, dude. Sorry to say that. I hate that that happens. A lot of you dudes that are sad to miss the stream finally make it on here, but it's just by chance you hop on a little bit too late. So I'm going to post like the day before I stream next week, okay? Chances are I'm going to stream on Friday. I will post on Thursday and let you guys know getting on Friday. Cool? Tim, good to hear that you got your lures, man. Sorry to hear that it took so long. I feel like I owe you, but that was a good giveaway that you won. So anyway, guys, really appreciate you hanging out here. As always, if you have any questions, comments, recommendations, anything like that, feel free to leave a comment on any of my videos. Send me an email. My contact information is on my YouTube page. Send me a DM on Instagram. Anything. I'm available, guys. And if you hear about any awesome deals or cool lures coming out, let me know. Give me a heads up. I'll try to do the same thing, guys, okay? All right. Well, super appreciate you guys, all of your support. 13 thumbs up right now. If you haven't already done that, hit the thumbs up button for me. Leave a comment. Have a great rest of your weekend, and I'll see you in the next stream, guys. Cheers.